wait until window shows video before beginning presentation. Okay. Not quite there yet, but it's getting close. All right, and we have one more person to get into the, let's just ignore that. Here, how do I have to go over here, and there we go. And get the Zoom back up. Where's the Zoom? There we are. All right, and get one more person is coming along to be admitted up here. Let's see. So did you get Jacques?
Yes.
Yes. Can you tell us your name, please?
Okay.
Jacques. Okay.
Jacques Siricat. Yep.
Okay, Jacques. And then there is someone McConnelly. Okay. All right. All right. So today we are going to be taking a look at the jurisdictional question, if you will, but what we are really looking at is orthodoxy in America, how it got here, why we are structured the way we are, how it relates to one another. Let's get started with the PowerPoint, which will sort of offer some of these questions, and I'll be able to give you some of the historical background. Let's get this playing. There we go. All right. That. Okay. So orthodoxy in America. When I put this PowerPoint together, there were only these men saints who have been recognized in North America, and they're wonderful. Actually, one of them is local, and we will talk about him a little bit, Saint Medarea of Libertyville. But recently, a female saint from Alaska, Saint Olga or Mashtushka, Alaska, has been recognized by the OCA, and so I took one of her little icons and stuck it into the corner because we hope to represent the fullness of orthodoxy in America. One of the things that designates the maturity, the spiritual maturity of a church, and its move towards independence or autocephaly, is in fact that it has local saints. It has its own saints with their own unique historical conditions of this land, and we actually have a host of them. So, and what we have here is actually quite a broad selection from across the jurisdictions. We have Serbians represented, some from various areas of the Russian Orthodox communities as they've sort of shifted over time. We have one from the Antiochian Orthodox jurisdiction. We have from the Ukrainian, excuse me, not Ukrainian, but he was Carpatho-Russian, and he was Eastern Rite Catholic who now became Orthodox, ended up becoming Orthodox. And what we don't have up there yet, actually, is Greek Orthodox, which is a little bit interesting, but that will be remedied, I'm sure. So, what we have to ask ourselves here for today's lesson, and by the way, since it is the last of our sessions together, I'm happy to answer questions that go beyond the particular aspects of today's lesson. If you have questions that have risen up from other classes, it's all game. We can talk about all of them. But really today we were kind of trying to look at where we're at here as a church. And there are problems that have to do with history, ecclesiology, or how we live as a church, how we understand ourselves as a church. They have to do with pastoral questions. How do you care for the Christians in your community? And they have to do with questions of identity and how we present ourselves and missionize in this new land. So some of the questions that we are faced with, people come at us with these questions, but we have to sort of think to ourselves about them too, is how are we one church? How are we not like so many 12 different churches? Oh, is the Greek church the same as the Russian church? Is the same as the Serbian church? Are they the same? How? Are we many churches? In what sense might that be true? What does the landscape of Orthodox life in America look like? And to really understand what it looks like today, we're going to go back and look at how did we get to where we are today. No point in looking up there. There's no one there. All right. And I do want to also bring to our understanding what is really unique about the history and experience of the Orthodox Church in its American reality. We have to understand that as Christian faith moved from the various Orthodox homelands into regions around the homelands, adjacent, it followed a certain distinct pattern. And that pattern was uniquely changed. It was totally different when the church came here to the New World. I wouldn't say totally. There were some elements that looked familiar, but it was different in some substantial ways that surprised and also made it a little bit difficult for the hierarchs, for the communities to actually know what to do. It had never happened before, never been done before. And what happened in the Americas, and I'm going to focus on North America, but of course one could look at South America, Central America as well. They have their unique sort of experiences. But I'm going to look at North America, primarily the United States. Canada has its own specific sort of dynamics, but they are very similar to what is going on in the United States. Subsequently, you could see this same pattern happening in Australia. So Australia sort of, in many ways, reflected what happened to the United States, but decades later. Needless to say, though, they still have their own unique challenges. All right, something in the chat. Let me just see what's up. Okay. Michael said I was dropped for a few minutes. Okay, but you're back, I guess. Okay. All right. And then, of course, what we'd like to do is talk about the future. Is the future going to be just more of the same, or is there something happening that will look different? All right. So, yeah, well, we're Orthodox, so we're going back in time, guys. We cannot escape our past, right? We are definitely shaped by our historical background, and in particular, the experience under the Ottoman regime, under the Ottoman Empire. Now, honestly, you might think that's ancient history, but it is very much alive in the Orthodox consciousness. And truly, even my grandparents lived under Ottoman rule. My grandparents came from the region around Constantinople and in Constantinople, which was called Constantinople when they were born, because it did not take the name Istanbul until the 1920s. By that time, they had immigrated here. But it's not ancient history. It's still within the mindset of the generation, certainly, who came here. And it is still in some way impacting. So let's talk about that. what was that history that had some impact on who we are today? Well, as you can see, the Ottoman Empire in its largest version included, that's all of the red there, it included areas of the Middle East, where the Antiochian Orthodox communities come from, the Church of Alexandria, which is off in the African, North Africa, such as Egypt. It encompassed the vast region, which used to be the Byzantine Empire, originally centered in Constantinople, of course. It included the area that is Greece. It included the area that is Serbia. It included the area that is Albania, Armenia, many of the areas that are fully Orthodox communities were completely encased and subsumed under the Ottoman Empire. Russia remained apart. Russia remained independent, and that had its own dynamic. So, but we're going to look right now at the communities that were under Ottoman rule. They used this system called the millet system to facilitate their rule. What they did is they turned to the leadership of communities that were already established. But because the Ottoman Turks were Muslims, they saw leadership through their religious leader. The religious leader was an ethnarch, somebody who was both the ethnic and the religious leader of the community. And that person was the one who was given charge over the people that were under his religious and as a designated representative of the caliph, of the government of the empire, Ottoman Empire, he was basically their legal ruler as well. These people, these groups of people, were protected with some specific laws that gave them some rights, but the rights always put them at a disadvantage vis-a-vis the Muslims and the Turkish Muslims. They were considered to be communities that were of lesser, lesser rights. Okay, so it would take, for example, maybe 2 or 3 even Christians in court to counter the statement of one Muslim. And there were other rules as well. Christians could not enter and be at a higher level physically. So often you would find they weren't allowed to ride horses because that would put them higher than the Muslims. But even more so, there were many restrictions on external dress, their ability to build churches, their ability to educate. So there were definitely second-class citizens, but they were protected in other ways. This system, it facilitated the rule by the Ottomans because then they didn't have to police these people. They just got the taxes from them. They didn't have to put them through their law courts. They had their own law courts. So it allowed them this vast empire without as much manpower. But in a very important way, it worked against the Ottoman Turks because they didn't assimilate into the community, right? They remained ghettoed, but island communities within the larger structure. And so that facilitated the ethnic communities in maintaining their faith and their identity as Greeks, as Serbians, as Armenians, right? So now, as I said, each millet system was under the supervision of an ethnarch or a national leader. For the Greeks, it was under the Patriarch of Constantinople, and he had to report directly to the Sultan. And one of the things that happened during Ottoman rule is that the Sultan invested the church's leader with the powers of his authority. And that also required a fee. Okay. And it was to the advantage of the Ottoman ruler to have a sort of a rapid turnover. If he needed money, it would be suddenly the patriarch would be disgraced, or sometimes he was murdered, or something happened and they needed a new patriarch, and lo and behold, there was a new fee. So it was actually, it led to a corruption of some of the highest ranking Orthodox leaders. It's really a miracle that the church maintained its identity and its purity, and we still had saints and martyrs throughout this entire period of time. It was not allowed to educate children or to have seminaries. So priests had to be sent away or were to Western countries for education, like to Rome or Venice, or there would be clandestine schools that operated. Okay, Connor, you raised your hand. Go ahead and unmute, and I should have muted everybody. I will after Connor speaks, but go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, sorry. Is this a bad time or?
No, I need some water. Go ahead.
I just want to say two quick things. That was a lot of people that maybe are of other denominations or not Orthodox will try to point to problems within the Orthodox Church, either in present or past, as some kind of proof that we are not the true church. Well, I think as you're getting into, and you will get more into, because we're a decentralized church, it's not so much that we have one supreme pontiff or indefectible, infallible patriarchs, but more the church as a whole through council generally is how we make decisions. So I think that a lot of people misunderstand that, we're all human. We still make mistakes. Regardless of your clerical rank. So,
Yeah.
but I really think it's a miracle. A lot of people will argue that because the Orthodox Church obviously, has less members than the Catholic Church, therefore we can't be the true church. But really, I think that the fact that we survived, as you were saying, Ottoman rule and then the, persecution of the Soviets, I think is pretty incredible.
Yeah, when people tell me that, I tell them, I'm sorry, I did not read this. That was wrong. Okay. When people say, well, you suffered corruption, you're not that numerous, I said, you know what? I'd like to see what 500 years of oppression and suffering your church went through, and then you can come back and talk to us, okay? Because the reality is, and again, I mean, when my grandparents came, essentially, it was, they were just, there was this exchange of populations. People were marched almost to death, to the sea, and yet they still held their faith. They held their faith through tremendous pressure to convert to convert to Islam, because then you would have all the rights and privileges. You would have all the glory and attention. But no, they suffered generation after generation to live with oppression and threats and occasional outbreaks of persecution, because their faith was so central to their life. And you're absolutely right in terms of making decisions that affect the life of the church. It isn't just one particular hierarch or even just a close-knit group of hierarchs, because we know that the way authority works within the church is it's hierarchical, but it's also conciliar. And you think of a cross, right? It's up and down, but it's also across the beams, right to left. And that way you have the stability of a hierarchy from generation to generation, but you have the fullness of the voices of the church. And you do also have, let me tell you, there have been times where the laity have kept the church on its path of righteousness. And for example, during the iconoclastic controversy. So in terms of numbers, you know, I'm not sure numbers, you know, what does that mean? What does that mean? The whole world was virtually, except for the Jews, were pagan before the coming of Christ. It doesn't mean that was the best way or the right way. So obviously numbers in and of themselves don't tell the whole story. But thanks for the insight and the point there. So under this Ottoman rule, it is true that we had oppression for many, many centuries, but it kept these ethnic communities intact. The language was intact. The identity that they had a sense of themselves as being separate, and the faith that was absolutely essential to who they were, okay? And as the Ottoman rule began to weaken, these various ethnic communities, the national groups, began to pull away. And you saw through the 19th century, the reclamation of the lands that the Orthodox, you know, had lived on and were their homelands. And as they pulled out of the Ottoman Empire, the autocephalous, or churches that are each have their own head, their own patriarch, their own leadership, began to be established. So my question to you is, have you guys learned about what autocephaly is, what an autocephalous church is? Or do I have to talk about that? About the each church having their own administrative head?
I didn't learn in school.
To hear the particulars.
Say, John, that could you say that louder, John?
I was saying I wouldn't mind hearing the particulars on that.
Okay, all right.
Sorry to slow things down.
No, I didn't get any real clear. Oh yeah, we all know about that. So okay, I'll try to just do this in a couple of minutes. Did someone raise their hand again? Or no? Okay. So the way the Orthodox, as I think Connor had pointed out, the way the Orthodox churches are structured, and this is ancient. This goes back to the earliest life of the church. This isn't just the Orthodox Church. This is the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, okay? They always shared unity in doctrine and worship. That means the sacraments. And so the basic doctrine and teaching of the faith and how we worship is shared. But in order to truly meet the needs of the community, administratively, the churches operated under different heads, and those heads were more or less patterned on the major metropolises of the Roman Empire. So, of course, the ancient patriarchates were Antioch, Alexandria. These were the big metropolitan centers of the Roman Empire. Rome, after Constantine established Constantinople in the 4th century, Constantinople. And then Jerusalem was always included, not because it was really a metropolis, but because it was the place where Jesus lived and was crucified and rose from the dead. So it had a place of honor in the wider group. As the gospel spread into territories that were far more further, apart, Initially, as a church moved into a new territory, that territory is under the patriarchal head of the church that evangelizes it. It sort of is its mother. But as that church grows into some sort of mature identity, it has its own theological schools, it has saints, it has its own sort of language and expression. You would have the church granted independence to operate independently, not independent in doctrine, not independent in sacraments. They can't create their own sacraments, but in terms of how they administer. That is, who they're going to raise up as bishop, where they will be appointed, and some other things too. There are certain things that are flexible within the life of the church, and you can see these variations across the different areas. And over time, some of them were very early. Bulgaria was very early, even though here it says Patriarchate of Bulgaria in 1872. That's after Ottoman rule, as it came back. Okay, but Bulgaria actually, I believe it was the 9th century, and Serbia was, I think, the 14th century. So these were granted their own independence. They lost it under Ottoman rule, and as they pulled out of Ottoman rule, they reasserted their independence for administrative purposes. All of those patriarchs have equal votes and voices when it comes to sitting in assembly with one another. In fact, you all may not know this, but at councils, at the general councils, it's not just the patriarchs who have a vote, but all the bishops. Every bishop has one vote. Now, yes, the patriarchs, the heads, they come with more authority insofar as the bishops are more or less under their jurisdiction, under their direction. But nevertheless, bishops are able to vote as they are guided by the power of the Holy Spirit and their own conscience. And the actual highest ordained position in the Orthodox Church is bishop. All the other positions we talk about, metropolitan, patriarch, those are elevations, but they're not ordained to a new position. They are bishops who are functioning at a different administrative level. So these are the churches that began to be established in the 19th century. And the reason we pull them out to look at them is because they're all going to be sending people through the immigration process into the American territories. Connor, go ahead. I'll take my water. Go ahead and ask your question.
I think one of the things I find really beautiful about Orthodoxy is what expression means. And I think that when you go to, maybe I'm assuming everyone here is going to a Greek Orthodox church or at least been to one, but if you go to like a Russian Orthodox church or a Serbian Orthodox church or something, that you might have slightly different liturgical practices, or the iconography style is a little different, or smaller expressional things, but it's not, you're going to a Russian Orthodox church and they're teaching an entirely different theology than the Serbian Orthodox church. And the Serbian Orthodox church has a different theology than the Greek Orthodox church. They might emphasize different things, but the faith is the same. And I think that, if you ever notice, like the Catholic Church, their rites generally express not just the same faith differently or emphasize differently, but they often literally express different things and have disagreements. And that's not to say that our churches don't have disagreements, but just on the broad strokes, generally, I don't think we have, we're still one church. And I think that, it's pick your flavor kind of thing is how I've heard a priest say it. But
yeah, I do think it's important for people to recognize that because it's too easy for people who are not Orthodox to look at our churches and to be impressed by the differences, to see the differences as somehow really making us different churches. Different languages, as you say, different maybe iconographic styles, but that's all superficial. When it comes to the expression of the faith, we might have differences that pertain to how we incarnate, how we make alive the faith in our particular context, but it is the same faith. And we can go to any of the Orthodox churches and be assured that it will be the same sacraments that we are receiving. And we should all be able to receive sacraments at all the Orthodox churches. We should, but when we get to some of the issues that we have to face, I'll talk about that a little bit. But so yes, there is uniformity, there's communion, there's a shared faith. And we shouldn't allow the sort of superficiality of the differences to confuse us. Even Orthodox, though, at times will sometimes react if they've become very comfortable in their own Orthodox community. They might go to one that is not the same and be sort of mesmerized by the differences, and that can be unfortunate because then we begin to sort of label each other as this church is more this way or this church is more that way, when we're really still the same church. So I can see I'm going to take a while, better get a little bit more quickly moving here. So when we come to what happened here in the United States, we have to understand that there were two major pathways that the Orthodox faith came to America. The one everybody's very familiar with. So I'm going to start with the other one first. The one everyone's familiar with is immigration, and we'll get there. But the reality is there was another path that was more ancient, that was earlier, and it came through Alaska. It came through the presence of Russian explorers and traders who began to come from Russia over the waters to Alaska. And they began to not just trade with the native population here, but intermarry. And when monks in Russia heard of this, they were they were intrigued, they were excited, they were eager to bring Orthodox faith and teaching to this new place, this new world. So let's take a look at this. And because we have two very different processes happening, when they met, these two different sort of ways, when they sort of come together, you have something that never happened before. So visually, we can see that the Russian missionaries started in Alaska. They actually began around 1794 and then moved down the West Coast. The immigration, which begins, as early as the 17th century, late 17th century, but really doesn't get moving until the 19th century. When in the late 19th century, you have this huge influx of immigrants who are Orthodox coming into the New World. And they came through New York, some Florida, and some through Louisiana, New Orleans. So who were these first missionaries to bring the Orthodox faith to the New World? I do want to honor them. There were these 8 monks who traveled 7,327 or so miles, and it took them almost 300 days to come from really some of the western regions of Russia over to Kodiak Island. And they suffered tremendous difficulties and challenges to do so. When they arrived in the Alaskan territories, they found that the corporations that were running the trading of the various materials were really taking advantage of the Native Americans and were extremely cruel to them, almost really treating them like slaves. And the monks were aghast. And they complained bitterly, and they said, this is unsupportable. We cannot allow this to happen. But they were just monks. And so they realized they needed the authority of having somebody of higher rank amongst them. And so most of them returned back to Russia. In the meantime, by the way, they did face some sort of, sometimes there was opposition, and one of the monks was martyred by the natives. But for the most part, they were received well by the natives. The leader of the group, Monk Joseph, returned with most of the monks, and he was elevated to the position of bishop to return to Alaska to have the authority to basically counteract the corporations that were exercising this kind of almost slavery. Unfortunately, he and all of the monks that were with him died in a shipwreck during his return. We know that one of the monks who remained, St. Herman, retreated to Spruce Island, where his hermitage is now, and he became a very beloved figure that continued to have an impact on the Native communities. And we saw a number of conversions happening. And he is one of the first, actually, I think he is, I don't know if the martyrdom of Juvenali probably put him first, but among the first of the saints recognized in America. And one can still make a pilgrimage to visit his hermitage there. And he reposed in 1887. 1837, sorry, yeah, I knew that couldn't be right. Another monk, not a monk, a married priest who was sent to minister to the native people, Father John Veniaminoff, came with his wife and his children, and he was an incredibly devoted missionary. He learned the Aleutian language. He translated materials, portions of scripture, portions of the worship service into the native language. An important point, by the way, because he operated under the the missionary principle that people should worship in their native language, not in a translation or in a foreign language, right? This man went through canoes and kayaks, and he went through ice floes, and he baptized everybody, and he married people, and he was a tireless missionary. And his wife passed, and then that enabled him to be raised as bishop. And in 1840, he was consecrated as the first bishop to govern that area, to oversee that area. And he has the name Innocent, and of course he is now Saint Innocent of Alaska. And indeed, he returned in 1868 and ended up receiving the highest position as Metropolitan of Moscow. There was no patriarchate at that time in Russia, and that has to do with Russian history, but the Russian patriarchate had been abolished for a couple of hundred years. It wasn't reestablished until the eve of the Russian Revolution. So it's just it had to do with Peter the Great and other people there. Okay. We saw a lot of growth through this missionary activity, and I'm not going to take the time to go through all of these, but there was a seminary, a mission school, parishes. It started up in Alaska, but then it moved down into San Francisco in 1868. That's what is today's Holy Trinity or Orthodox Church in America Cathedral there. And in 1870, the very first diocese of Orthodox in America was established. It was called the Diocese of the Aleutian Islands and Alaska. It was underneath the Russians. There was nothing under the Greeks, under the Serbs, nobody else. Okay. This was the first diocese, the first bishop, the first jurisdiction. And we have some photos. We have Orthodox priests with some of the native populations, some of the headmen in Glenview, Alaska, and in the Seal Islands of Alaska. We have St. Michael's Cathedral in Sitka, both a photo from 1887 and one that's fairly contemporary. By the time Alaska was sold to America in 1867, the Russian mission had grown to 12,000 native Christians. It's remarkable considering there's so few monks that started this. 9 parishes, 35 chapels, 17 schools, 4 orphanages. And more photos from, early Russian missions, an early native wedding party in 1898. There's still an active Orthodox presence among native Aleutians and Alaskans in America, and they have a seminary that is operative there. Now we're going to segue to the immigration experience, because all of this is going to build up to, why do we have all of these jurisdictions in America? One would think you start with this Russian diocese. It would spread out its missionaries. They have a structure that could meet the needs of people, but they need man. And let's face it, America is this vast territory. They were on the West Coast. People were arriving on the East Coast. They had no idea. They didn't know this diocese, this Orthodox diocese existed. Now, that diocese did come east, but by that time, other stuff had happened. So, between 1870 and 1910, more than 25 million immigrants, amongst them many Orthodox. You have there the first Orthodox church in the Eastern Territories. This is in Holy Trinity in New Orleans. This photo is actually from 1911, but the church was incorporated before that. What did these immigrants find when they came? They found nothing. Unlike when churches missionized territories in the old world, they sent out people with books, they sent out priests to offer sacraments, they sent out people to build a little church. These people arrive and they have nothing. So they raise the funds themselves and purchase the property. Now, that doesn't happen in the Orthodox old worlds, right? The government is Orthodox. You don't have people incorporating and building a church and then saying, okay, send me a priest, right? This is not how it happened. They had to write home and beg for clergy. And what clergy wanted to come to America? It was not the most educated or the ones who were, solidly settled. There were people who were sometimes, fringe or unable to make ends meet or looking for new opportunities. Now, there were many faithful who came, but not everybody was of that quality, and they didn't have anyone here to oversee them. There were no bishops here. So the priest comes and he doesn't have somebody to support him, and the people don't have somebody to address any issues with. They had to establish their own administrative structures, their parish councils, their governing boards, their school systems. Okay, they began to educate their children themselves based on what they knew They developed programs for ethnic study and language. These people all came from communities where to be Orthodox was to be Greek, was to speak Greek. Why? Because remember, under Ottoman rule, that was how they maintained their identity through all the different oppressions. And so they were able to see themselves here in this new world and hold on to their identity. But part of that was hold on to the language, hold on to your ethnicity, if you're going to hold on to the faith, right? So those things came here deeply intertwined. We get a lot of flack. We get a lot of criticism for being too ethnic. Our churches are too ethnic. But there's a reason, there's a history, right? These people established philanthropic groups, youth groups, programs for assistance to help newcomers get assimilated, learn the language, find jobs, and they purchased land for cemeteries. People wonder why the Orthodox churches in America have such powerful and vocal and assertive laity. Well, guess what? That's it. There's a historical background to it. It's not because we're American and we have to assert our American identity. There's some of that too, perhaps, because this is how we live in our world. But it's also part of our history. The lay people did the bulk of the work in establishing and running the church. It's not like the Russian diocese was doing nothing, though. They began to see all of this activity on the East Coast, and they moved first from Alaska to San Francisco in 1972, and then in 1905, the Russian diocese was transferred to New York, and their primate became the archbishop. And initially, this group had a vision for America to have a unified Orthodox community, all under this one diocese, which eventually would take on independence, but, you know, under this diocese. And in fact, you know what, I'm going to actually skip over St. Alexis Toth because it's too complicated. What you see in this diocese is the raising up of ethnic hierarchs who can meet the needs of various ethnic communities that they envision all being underneath this one administrative body, this one diocese. And so within this Russian diocese, the first archimandrite that was elevated to the point, ordained to the position of bishop in America was Antiochian, Archimandrite Raphael Hawalini, and he served under the Russian diocese. Okay, he was an auxiliary bishop under the Russian Orthodox Church in America to meet the needs of the Arab-speaking, the Orthodox that came from the Middle East, from the Arab countries, right? And I mean, Saint Raphael was phenomenal. He did tremendous work. Established 29 parishes, established St. Tikhon's Monastery, established a magazine that began to speak to Orthodox in English, not just in their native, their home world languages. Also within the Russian diocese, they began to envision, well, what about the Serbs? And so they turned to St. Sebastian of San Francisco and Jackson. He was an archimandrite who was given the task of serving the Serbian communities. The one who had this vision was Archbishop Tikhon. Tikhon served here in the U.S., and when he completed his service here, about 1907, I think, something like that, he returned to Moscow, to Russia, and on the eve of the revolution became the first patriarch for a couple hundred years to actually be consecrated as patriarch. He died under under Soviet oppression, and is understood to be a martyr as well as an enlightener of the faith. His story is remarkable, and I recommend you take a look at his story as well. But it was in America before he ended up going back to Russia. And he had this vision, and I just wanted to say, he wrote this in 1905. He says the diocese, he's imagining this big Russian diocese, right? It's not only multinational, it's composed of several Orthodox churches which keep the unity of faith. And this is what we we're talking about before, but preserve their peculiarities in canonical structure, in liturgical rules, in parish life. Certain little things that are distinctive, that sort of come out of the expression that this particular group of people have to incarnate, make alive their faith. These peculiarities are dear to them and can be perfectly well tolerated in the pan-Orthodox scene. We do not consider that we have the right to suppress the national character of the churches here. So he wanted everybody to be themselves, right? But to be one church. He says, we confer on them the latitude to be governed by leaders of their own nationality. Life in the New World is different from that in the Old, a greater autonomy, and he's envisioning someday, possibly autocephaly should be granted to the church in America. But you see here, it's a vision of a unity. And you're like, well, okay, but how did we end up with the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, the Serbian Orthodox Archdiocese, the Bulgarian? Because those didn't exist in 1905. Well, it didn't take too long. Okay. So you don't have archdioceses established, or even dioceses yet, but somewhere right around the turn of the first decade of the 20th century, you have communities say, look, we need definitive leadership here. And they petitioned for bishops, they petitioned to have the jurisdiction from their home world patriarch. Greece initially was under the Church of Greece. Today, it's under the ecumenical patriarch. We're not going to have time to get into the politics of that, but it started under the Greek Church in Greece. For those of you who don't know, the church in Greece is autocephalous, and it is not under the ecumenical patriarch. It's the Greeks who live outside of Greece who are under the ecumenical patriarch, not the ones in Greece, except for Mount Athos, but that's a whole separate situation. So the Greeks who are in Australia, the Greeks who are in South America, the Greeks who are in Canada, they're all under the ecumenical patriarch. Church of Greece, those are all under the Metropolitan of Athens. He's their autocephalous head. So initially we were under him, but that changed at about 1920 or so. What you have, however, in this period of time between 1908 and 1917 are parishes that are becoming more distinctively ethnic. And then something happened. The Russian Revolution, guys. The Russian Revolution. What happened is this Russian diocese that could have been the source of unity was cut off completely from the motherland, from its own patriarch, because of political turmoil and because of the things that the patriarchs were required to require of Russians outside of Russia. And again, we can't get into the politics of it, but it was oppressive, it was intolerable, and the Russians outside of Russia, for the most part, refused to do what was being asked of them, and broke with the patriarch with the idea that was temporary. But when that happens, the other faith, the other Orthodox lose confidence. The Russians, in fact, were fighting amongst themselves. how to relate to the Patriarch of Russia, who's in charge. And so the other ethnic mother churches saw this as, you could say, an opportunity or necessary, that they have to establish dioceses to care for their people in America who really didn't have leadership. And so this is the time when the jurisdictions are established as dioceses and archdioceses. You have, in 1918, the churches go from Greece back to the ecumenical patriarch, and then actually he founds the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in 1922. The Serbians are established in 1926 as a diocese, in 1928, the Ukrainians in 29, the Romanians. And I have highlighted the two largest Russian communities. That one diocese fractured into basically 4 different groups, but in America, 2 sort of were established as the most notable. One was called the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, or ROKOR, that still operates. They broke with Moscow, but they also broke with the other Russian group, which was called the Metropolia, the Russian Mission Church in the U.S. This was the diocesan church. It's the biggest. It was the biggest of the Russian community, and it ultimately became the OCA. So, yeah.
Yeah, just from the Romanian perspective, I wanted to tell you, or at least what I know.
Yeah,
since I've been here.
Yeah.
So the first parish was established in 1910, 1911, but under the OCA, which existed at that point.
It was called, it was called the Diocese of, it was the one we were talking about, the Russian.
Yes, the
Church.
Russian.
Yeah.
This one, the episcopate, established in 1929, is different from the patriarchate, so it's not under the Romanian church, the official patriarchate of the Romanian.
I'll have to modify my PowerPoint. Okay.
But I think this one is under the OCA. The 1921 Romanian Orthodox Episcopate is under the OCA, so it's not, under the Romanian Patriarch.
Okay.
There is one and only one, unfortunately, parish, which is also the cathedral, and it's the extension of the Romanian Patriarchate.
Yeah.
But that was established in the 2000s. So
Yes, what we've had now is that Moscow is doing the same thing. It's reaching into the U.S. and establishing patriarchal parishes that don't go under any of the churches that have been here already, but are under the patriarchate itself. And those are moves that have to do with trying to establish certain kinds of authoritative voices in the areas.
it's political.
It's political. It's political. Guys, it's 8:04 according to that clock, and I think we need a 4-minute break, 3-4-minute break. Okay. All right. We're going to get some fresh water, and this is our local saint, by the way, Saint Medallion. They muted themselves, which is good. Well, I'm not sure if everyone's back, but I am gonna go ahead because the three of us are back. So, all right. All right, so as these jurisdictions are established, bishops are elevated or ordained to the positions, and the first Serbian bishop who's ordained to the position is Madaria of Libertyville. And in fact, he has been now recognized as a saint, and his relics are up in Libertyville. And at St. Peter and Paul here, we have had 2 or 3 different pilgrimage groups go to venerate his relics. I was teaching at the school that they founded the seminary and the monastery. Well, you'll see here, the next one here. Hang on a second. This church here is where his relics are located. That's the monastery church that he founded. He basically helped build it with bricks that he carried himself. He used to ride his bicycle from Chicago to Libertyville because they had no money, they had no transportation, and he died young of tuberculosis. And he was a very humble and pious man, just an incredible example of humility. So if you ever have the opportunity, I suggest they don't open the relics throughout the week, but after liturgy on Sunday, usually they open the relics for veneration. And it's just on, is it Milwaukee? Milwaukee, that's right. Okay. So here you see him again. All right. The Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. So, of course, you know, this church is Greek Orthodox, so I was a little more specific about us. But the very first presence of Greeks in the Americas are in 1767 and came as indentured servants to Florida. Nothing much came of that group, that's for sure. Most of them disappeared into the swamps. But the first Greek Orthodox Church was in New Orleans and indeed was multi-ethnic. And then, of course, we had the mass immigration. You had various political divisions that almost tore the church apart. Actually, pretty much every ethnic group has suffered from political turmoil of their homelands. The Serbs were divided. The Ukrainians have been divided over and over and over again. The Greeks were divided. The Russians, of course, were divided into 4 groups, but 2 pretty much at odds with each other and not in communion. I'm going to just assume the same thing happened with the Romanians.
Absolutely.
So all of this led to a lot of turmoil in getting our life together, building our churches, and we're not even talking to each other of the same ethnic group, so we're not talking across the ethnic groups either. Nevertheless, you have some important figures rise. The Metropolitan Athenagoras, who had been primate of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in North and South America, he is actually elevated to ecumenical patriarch in 1949. And indeed, he is a phenomenal figure. He's a figure who met with the Pope. He's a leader of great import. But sometimes people who are very decisive and very active can be very divisive too. But he is one of the phenomenal leaders. As the churches were growing, in terms of immigrations and how they are settled and the kinds of jobs they begin to acquire, the Greeks become the wealthy and largest community of Orthodox in America. There's no question. when you talk about Orthodox in America, for a long time, the elephant in the room is the Greeks. Okay, they're just the ones who they're most numerous, but they're also the wealthiest. Many of the other ethnic communities came for industry and mining, but a lot of the Greeks came and became independent business people. And this causes certain dynamics amongst the Orthodox communities, right? Nevertheless, we do have this period of consolidation and expansion. In the 30s, the two great theological schools, the Holy Cross, the Greek Orthodox, and St. Vladimir's, the Russian, and St. Tikhon's, also OCA, are established. So these are the most important of the theological schools. St. Savas was established, the Serbian, but it has not yet received accreditation, and it's always just been focused on ministering to the Serbian community.
They don't have accreditation now?
Not yet. Oh, not yet. Yeah. So I have some photos though from the establishment of these various seminaries. And what does this enable us to do? It enables us to train our own priests and also begin to function on the wider American landscape, to participate in dialogues with the other churches, to represent ourselves at various conferences so that people will stop talking about us with their own ideas, and we get to actually say who we are from within our own kind. And we are beginning to gain credibility at universities and training people to be able to be on faculty beyond just Orthodox institutions. This is all beginning in the 50s, I'll say. Okay. Still, for up until probably the 21st century, the mindset that governed Orthodox in America, both from the motherlands, the mother churches, and the people here, is this idea of diaspora. Diaspora actually comes from the experience of Jews when the Temple Mount was totally destroyed, and religion, how they expressed their faith, how they worshiped, no longer able to offer sacrifice at the temple, and everything had to change, and they dispersed through the world. But the idea was the heart and center of the faith is still in Jerusalem, right? The mindset of diaspora is that wherever you are, your home is elsewhere. It's still back in the old world, which lends to certain issues in becoming fully expressed in this new world, right? There are important reasons this happened, and part of that was continuing immigration. Throughout the 20th century, there were new waves of immigrants. I was unusual in that my grandparents were all immigrants, but my parents were born here, and I was born here. And I'm pretty old, okay? I was born in 55. So my parents were born in, one was in 1918, one was in 1922. So they were born here in America. They were fully American. I married an immigrant, okay? Because immigrants still kept coming, and it does impact the way the churches are operating and how they express themselves and what's important and how are they going to operate. All right, so part of the problem was, instead of serving the American people, being outward looking, being invested in outreach and mission, the jurisdictions were more invested in caring for its own people, making sure that they are, have a solid place to live, a place to worship, don't feel threatened, right? It was an essential task, but it hampered the work of being an Orthodox church in a new world, sharing the faith and expressing itself. So some of the things, let's say you had that occurred, high priority to the preservation of ethnic culture and identity. It's less so today and less so in St. Peter Paul. But, go to the various churches in the Chicagoland area, and you will find a spectrum of those who have more English in their liturgy and in their services and in their education, and those who have more Greek. Or how important that ethnic identity is. It's important to all of us. There's no question it's important to all of us. But for some of the churches, it's front and center. For others, it's a little bit more of, a flavor that sort of flavors the whole of the experience. Can it be an obstacle for bringing new people into the faith? Is it something that benefits the church? Is it something that hampers the church? You can make arguments for both points. Okay. But some of the consequences of this diaspora mindset and this weaving together of ethnic and religious identities some of the consequences are resistance to movement for Orthodox unity, to have the churches actually come together with an administrative unity that is sort of like what St. Tikhon envisioned in 1905. I'm not talking about unity that would stamp out ethnic identities, but a unity that would transcend the identities and allow for administrative use of the fullness of the resources of Orthodox. There has been in the past little concern for mission. I'm very happy to say that within the last 10, 20 years, a lot of this is shifting, but it was very much a reality, and it's still a reality in many places. Okay. Sort of a lack of engagement in the wider community beyond the ethnic group, and a strong attachment to ethnic language for worship and education. It's still an argument. It's still an argument in churches.
What can I say is that Greek Orthodox churches around here do better than other ethnic churches.
Yes. We think we have trouble, but as you say, if you go to the Romanian Orthodox Church, if you go to the Serbian Orthodox Church, they are still very much impacted by the necessity of carrying forth that language and that ethnic identity, and are not moving into the cultural identity of their children and their grandchildren who are here and are American and are not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. Not going back to Romania. It shouldn't be an insult to say that our children and grandchildren will celebrate the 4th of July as their Independence Day and not the 25th of March, which is Greek Independence Day. It should not be an insult to say that. Do I honor the patriots of 1825 and Greek independence? Of course I honor them. My great-grandparents were probably fighting in there, great-great-grandparents, okay? They came from the Peloponnesus. They are my dad's side. But I grew up here. My children grew up here. And that's something we have to kind of come to terms with. All right. We did see, starting in the 60s, the emergence of a sense of unity among the Orthodox, of something you might call an American Orthodox, your way of being Orthodox in America. Part of that comes through some of the work of Archbishop Jacobus, not the Jacobus who was Archbishop or Metropolitan in Chicago, but this is the one who was Archbishop of North and South America, stationed in New York. We had the founding of the Standing Conference of Canonical Orthodox Bishops in the Americas called SCOBA. This is a group that included all the Orthodox canonical jurisdictions, had bishops who attended, and now they all started to talk to each other and start to work together. It's pretty amazing, okay? In addition, there was movement to interface with the wider community. The North American Catholic Theological Consultation was founded, and it still operates. There have been joint statements about baptism, about mixed marriage, about various things that are important to the life of both Roman Catholic and Orthodox people. I'll show you the photo in the next one, but Archbishop Diakonos very famously marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Selma to Montgomery marches. But we still have more and more immigration. So yes, he was on the cover of Life. And in fact, my husband has that very magazine. We have that at home. He bought it when it happened. He did do that. But in addition, we have Orthodox moving into the public square. I have a photo of Orthodox Christians for Life participating in the anti-abortion movement. And I have a photo here of the very early days of SCOBA. It's one of the very first times the Orthodox bishops across jurisdictions sat down and began to work together. And let's see if there's something on the chat here I need to look at. Okay, Kevin had to go good night. That's fine. All right. And then something else extraordinary happened in 1970. Okay, so the church that had been the Russian diocese in America started in Alaska, moved across to San Francisco and then to New York, and then after the Russian Revolution, broke away from the Patriarch of Russia, identified themselves as the Metropolia. In 1970, worked with the Russian Patriarch to be granted autocephaly. And they are called the Orthodox Church in America, or OCA. They were established in 1970, and they are the only Orthodox church that operates with independent administrative functioning here in the United States. They are autocephalous. They don't go ask anybody anywhere else. Okay, when it comes to electing their head, the person who runs the administrative, structure. However, at that time, the Patriarch of Constantinople basically said Russia didn't have the authority to give OCA their autocephaly, and so it's not recognized by Constantinople. But what is wonderful is that while this canonical status is still being discussed, sacramental communion, intercommunion and unity was established, and doctrinal unity, so that we can go to each other's churches, we can go to each other's seminaries. It's more a matter of formality and canonical, working out the details of the canonical order of things. And there's disagreement about that. And I could talk about that if somebody wants to ask a question about it, but we're going to finish the PowerPoint first and then go back to anything that you want to dig deeper into. And I realize that this is history. But in order to understand where we are today and why we are today, and how we can go from where we are to something else, if we want to, even, you really have to see the process, right? Because there is this greater dialogue among Orthodox that is established in the 60s, because the bishops are speaking to each other, because the churches are becoming more confident and settled and resources are building, you begin to see joint ventures and also moving out into American life. So some of the important things that are founded are the OCF, Orthodox Christian Fellowship. Now, it was founded in 1965 and then fell out into disuse, but was reestablished in 2001, and that's for college students. In 1985, something very important was founded, the Orthodox Christian Mission Center. With that, we find Orthodox in America moving across the world to bring the faith to communities that are struggling, including a country that at one point had been entirely Orthodox, but then under communism had become violently anti-Christian and very atheist, Albania. And we have supported missionaries to help for that re-evangelization. And our speaker here at St. Peter and Paul during the Lenten lectures, Nathan Hoppy, is one of those missionaries. And he has been doing the various lectures at St. Peter and Paul. IOCC, International Orthodox Christian Charities. We had no pan-Orthodox charity community. We had, each church had their own charitable groups. The Orthodox, of course, the Greek Orthodox have Philoptochos, tremendous body of faithful who work towards helping the homeless and the hungry, etc. But IOCC reaches across the world, does not only help Orthodox, it helps all people. We have other things being founded, and in 2010, SCOBA shifted to something different, which is operating today. It's called the Assembly of Orthodox Canonical Orthodox Bishops, USA. And the important thing about that is they were charged to begin the dialogue toward understanding how the church can become one, have administrative unity, and autocephaly. The mother churches, nobody's doing anything quick, okay? This is going to take time. But they said it's time to begin this discussion, okay? So they are really working together. Here are some pictures from the various Orthodox groups. We have IOCC with the feeding, the soup kitchen and blankets for children. And then we have the Orthodox Christian Missions with baptisms in Africa. What else do we have with this greater unity? Well, we have the establishment of associations that are pan-Orthodox. We get to talk to each other now, work together as one Orthodox community. And amongst them is the OTSA, Orthodox Theological Society of America, which includes the scholars, the researchers, the theologians, the educators. I'm secretary right now of OTSA, but I hope it's my last year. It's a lot of work. We have OCAMPER, the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion. Our parishioner, Randa Anderson, is president of OCAMPER, probably her last year too. But it's bringing across the country people from the various areas of therapy to talk about how we can bring Orthodox mindset, Orthodox treatment to people who are suffering in mental health issues, in physical health issues. How do you talk about theological topics at all these universities from an Orthodox perspective if you don't have Orthodox theologians doing it? Well, now we do, and we have them supporting each other, and we have departments that are recognizing the importance of an Orthodox voice, and we have papers and beginning to have, and you reach people who are interested and thirsty, and we have converts that come through that route,
So it's not a Greek association, it's multi-ethnic.
They are, yes, they are multi-ethnic, all of these as well. They're multi-ethnic. It's not Greek. None of these are Greek. They're across all the Orthodox jurisdictions. Some of them include also the Oriental Orthodox. OTSA does. The Oriental Orthodox are the Armenians, the Coptics, the Ethiopian, and then the Syrian Orthodox. So those are included in some of these. We have an Orthodox Christian prison ministry. I won't go through all of these, but various initiatives and associations and commissions here. And you see, there's a picture from Saints Peter and Paul because Camper met here back in 2019, and then again met another time. And we have from the Orthodox Christian Ministry, from Project Mexico, and from one of the OTSA annual meetings. So we're kind of on our way, but there are some major hurdles in the way. And for those of you who don't know, the patriarchs of Moscow and Constantinople are not currently in communion. That was really tough. That was a very unhappy situation. And it's all because of I'm sorry, I know I'm Greek. I'm sure it's going to sound biased, but it's on the side of the Russian patriarch. He's the one who said we have to break communion. The ecumenical patriarch says, I'm not breaking communion. I'll share communion with you all. And but it happened because of the decision that the ecumenical patriarch made regarding Ukraine, granting the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine autocephaly, which the Russian Orthodox Church felt was overstepping their authority and creating an intolerable situation. It's all been extraordinarily exacerbated by the hideous war that's going on. Okay, so we don't want to even get into it. Apart from that big thing, okay, is you can't talk about unity if you have that going on globally. But apart from that, there is anxiety on the part of the mother churches. And I understand it with regard to the churches in the U.S. Uniting and becoming autocephalous, independent, because there is a great deal of support that the old world churches need, that they are receiving from America. And I'm not just talking money. Of course, money is part of it, but politically, how the U.S. operates globally impacts the way the churches experience what's going on in Turkey, in Serbia, in the Middle East, right? So if we were to lose this organic connection to the mother churches, this dependence on the mother churches, would we still be able to assist them, lift them up, provide the necessary support? Ideally, that would not change. Ideally, that would not change. But it's going to take some careful thought on how to put that in place. All right. Again, there's a lot of concern that if we have a unified Orthodox voice here, would the specific ethnic identities be stamped out? Would they be, sort of like just leveled out? And there are questions about the differences in our calendar. We can talk about that too. I'll finish the PowerPoint and then we can get back to calendar and talk about things that, might raise curious questions in your heads. There's differences in resources. So as I said before, if the Greeks are very rich, are they going to take control? And then, the Serbs will be always second rate or something like that. And these are concerns that have some legitimacy, right? We need to be sensitive to how to work together as a unified community. And then there are differences currently as to how converts are welcomed, the kinds of ways that we operate with mixed marriages and welcome them, what kinds of roles women have or don't have. So there are variations that some people feel right now might be problematic. There are a lot of strengths in unifying because honestly, when you have so much division, it's very hard to know, are you one church? Are you able to offer one vision? Are you able to, plus, you know, we have smaller and smaller parishes in certain locations. If we were to combine resources, we could really strengthen the ones that remain and perhaps grow them more efficiently. But part of the hesitance today is that when you have some differences about politics, differences about conservative, liberal kinds of things going on, maybe it's better to keep separate. You know, there's a hesitancy to unify. And then you say to yourself, well, wait a minute. What does Christ tell us? Doesn't he tell us to, you know, he prays to the Father that his followers will be one. He prays for our unity. If you read St. Paul over and over again, he extols how true discipleship means that you love one another and you are unified. You do not let these differences become definitive in how you treat one another, how you operate together. So if we are to continue with all of the divisions, we have to at least understand that as Christians, as Orthodox Christians, as the true church, we have to manifest unity in diversity. All right. Pentecost was all about unity in diversity. It's not stamping out diversity, but if you don't have that unity, you are not one church. You are not the faithful carriers of the truth that has been entrusted to us. So benefits, yes, sharing and pooling of resources, speaking with a voice that is effective, that is consistent, that people can trust. How many converts come to us? You know, if you're trying to preach, you know, you are the one true faith to people, and they're like, well, you can't get along with each other. Why should I come to your church? I want something where people see at least, you know, talk to each other, work together. So these are things that we should take seriously. And again, I do want to underscore how much progress has been made in us talking together, working together, understanding ourselves as one church. So while I'm saying the stuff about the problems, let's not forget the benefits, you know, the progress too, okay? Currently, our canonical status is non-canonical, okay? We are breaking lots of canons by having the jurisdictional system. And I know people are like, well, which canons? But there are 2 or 3 important canons that argue that you should not have separate bishops in one city. It should be one bishop for one city. Okay, it's theologically, ecclesiologically important. It comes from the idea that there's one Eucharist, one faith community, and officiated by one bishop. Now, you can have a bishop of Chicago and then a bishop of Glenview. Okay, you don't have to say you have to go clear across the country for another bishop, but you can't have people who are in overlapping jurisdictions. The church never operated that way throughout its life. And it only operates that way because of this unique path that Orthodoxy took in America. And it's not according to the identity of ourselves as the church. So yeah, there are good reasons why we need to change this stuff, okay? It's not just, we want to look better to people when we offer mission, but although that's important, but our own integrity tells us that we have to address this issue. And then partly we should remember that the Orthodox faith, now unlike the Catholics who imposed Latin wherever it went, right? That's one of the problems of the Catholic Church. It imposed Latin. The Orthodox Church always advocated for the people to worship in the language of their own nation and their own culture. And in fact, as it's moved into Russia, right? Cyril and Methodius, they developed the Cyrillic alphabet and they translated the text so that people could speak and worship in Slavonic, right? Ancient Old Slavonic. And Alaska, what did Innocent do? Bishop Innocent. He translated the materials into Aleutian. And in Mexico, we're translating materials into Spanish. And in Africa, we're translating into the various native languages. But in America, we're still having an argument as to whether we're going to say it in English or in the other ethnic languages. So there's a real question here about, what does that mean about incarnating, making the faith alive according to how you experience reality, how you experience this world. Our faith is an incarnational faith. That's why we have icons. That's why we have, incense. That's why we sing, we chant. All of these things are important. Our Christ himself is fully incarnate, fully human. And we need to honor that with this. Yeah, I love the Greek. And I always think everybody should know at least the creed and the Lord's Prayer in Greek, because there's some words you can't translate. But, when you do the whole service and the hymns, etc., no, we need it in the English. According to the way we operate as a faith ourselves. So what can it look like? And I was looking for pictures that sort of show you a broad spectrum of people. Here we have lots of different ages. Orthodoxy in America, Orthodox and American. But I was looking. I did find some with some people of color too, because, we are a faith that goes everywhere, everyone. Okay, everyone should feel welcome, absolutely. And so we have churches that are clearly embracing the fullness of humanity. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And this is Metropolitan Nathaniel at St. Peter and Paul, because I think we need to end by thinking, what about the next generation? And here he is with the children, right? What kind of church are we going to hand over? What will it look like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years? How can we grow this church so that our children will find it their home and share it with the world? And this, believe it or not, is a drone picture of Pascha outside of St. Barnabas. St. Barnabas is a church that's very close to us, nearby on Caldwell. And their tradition is to have the apostasy part outside, and then they go all into the church. And by the way, they also have fireworks. It's pretty cool. Because in Greece, they shoot off fireworks. So at St. Barnabas, they do too. But I put this here to say that, if we're the light to the world, we need to pass on the Paschal light to the world. It's not something that we just keep inside. keep it hide it in our buildings, right? Put it under the lampstand and hide it. That's what Christ told us. No, he didn't. He told us the opposite. Okay. So we have to pass this light out. We have to shine the light for the world. And part of that is trying to understand ourselves as an Orthodox church in America, reaching out to the world that's here around us. So, all right. Technically, we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to take the PowerPoint off, and I'm going to open up for questions or comments. I mean, we could talk about something as nitpicky as the calendar, or we can talk about questions from past sessions. Connor, go for it.
Yeah, sorry to keep asking. I was just wondering, so I've heard a lot of talk about reunion with the Catholics in 2025. I was wondering, is that possibility, reality? What would be the repercussions of that? Is it
No.
even in the scope
No.
of probability?
Yeah, no, zero probability. Okay.
Okay.
What you heard was there's some discussion in 2025. Our Easters happen to fall together next year. And this is something that periodically the churches have discussed at length. As we came to the turn of the century, year 2000, there was actually an extensive meeting. I think they met for several years between Orthodox and Catholics to work toward a unified calendar. That's the only kind of unified that we are even possibly discussing at this point. There's absolutely no chance that Orthodox and Catholics will be, and I'm sure that Bartholomew did not say anything that was meant that way. Whatever he said, if he said anything, was taken out of context, because it's just not going to happen. It's not even something that we're not working toward it. There are Orthodox Catholic commissions, but they are working on little details like they've been talking about the filioque, and pretty much the commissions keep coming down to, well, we should remove it from the creed. So it's not like the Orthodox are losing face in any of these things. But with regard to the Easter issue, okay, so what this commission discovered back in the year 2000 is that if you actually follow carefully the rules of the First Ecumenical Council about the date for Easter and use what they recommended that you use, which is the best astrological astronomical data, the best data that science could offer about the vernal equinox, the spring equinox. Okay, that's how it's calculated. It's calculated with, determining when the first day of spring is, and that leads to the determination of Easter. Well, when you do that, man, I'm telling you guys, I've looked at all the charts, etc. When you do that, brace yourselves, Orthodox. The calendar almost always works out the way the Western calendar, the Roman Catholics are operating. In other words, they're operating using the same rules of the First Ecumenical Council. The big difference between our calendars is that we are not following the best determination that modern science can give us for when the spring equinox is, but rather we use the Julian calendar, which, by the way, was a pagan calendar. It was established by pagans and doesn't operate with the best science of the day. Did the church fathers advocate using the best science of the day? They did indeed. If you read Basil the Great and all the others, they were very well aware that scientific advancements shift as time develops, and that we should be attuned to using the best mechanisms. However, realistically, we can see that by adopting a calendar that virtually year after year after year will look like it's capitulating to the West, it will look like, oh, they're right and we're wrong, okay, has repercussions for how the church understands itself. It doesn't, it will not feel like it's living according to its own identity and rule. It feels like we are, in some sense, yielding or compromising our path to reconcile with the West. It's very difficult to get people to understand what the situation is and to agree. And over the decades, the way the churches have operated is to say it's better for Orthodox to worship at Pascha together than to have a division over Pascha. But as you all know, we don't worship every one of our feast days together, right? The only feast days we worship together as Orthodox are what we call the movable feasts, those that are Pascha and those that are related to Pascha. Obviously, Ascension, because it's 40 days after Pascha, Pentecost, which is 50 days after Pascha. And pretty much that's it. All the other feasts, we don't celebrate together with the other Orthodox because of this calendar issue. And that is a great sorrow that we do need to address and reconcile and understand. There are good reasons to move to a modern calendar. There are reasons. Some people find them valid. I personally am not convinced, but you know, there are people who argue very strenuously for maintaining the old calendar, and they have their reasons for that. And we need to, as Orthodox, come to some consensus and understanding on this before we're going to move to a consensus and an agreement with the Roman Catholics. I cannot see the benefit of any one Orthodox group shifting calendar on Pascha at this point in time. I doubt the Patriarch is going to do that, but I think he's suggesting opening dialogue, since we're going to have the same Pascha anyway. Think of this as a possible first step. Well, let me tell you, in the year 2000, they came up with this calendar. They're like, okay, perfect opportunity. We're celebrating this year together. Let's, from here on in, follow this calendar. And none of the Orthodox churches signed it. And they're like, no. So I don't see anything changing at this time. So did that answer your question, or do you still have questions, comment about that?
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So,
Yeah, I was thinking that next year, 2025,
yeah,
it would be a good opportunity, or at least a big media opportunity, because it will be 1700 years from the first council.
yeah.
So I think they will
Yeah.
look at that like,
Thank you, Claudia. Very good point. They're also looking at it because, 325 was the first ecumenical council, and this is going to be 2025. So it's an anniversary year, an important anniversary year. And if we could maintain the rule that council, which we all agree that we want to follow the first ecumenical council. Okay, so we're all in agreement there. It's just a question of understanding that particular, when is the first day of spring, understanding that and why there's differences there. I do want to add one more thing. Yes, it's essential that Orthodox celebrate Pascha together. Honestly, I really wish we were celebrating all it didn't bother me until I began teaching at St. Sava. And then you know, I'm fasting and they're not yet, okay, for Advent, okay, for Lent, yes, we're all together, but for Advent, I start November 15th. They don't start until like 13, almost 2 weeks later. And then I'm having my Christmas when they're doing their finals. I thought, like, I'm out of here. I give them finals early because it's my Christmas. They don't, they're still doing finals and then they don't come back until after the 19th of January because that's 13 days after the Feast of the Epiphany. So it just feels like, wait a minute, for one church, how is this happening? Right? It feels very disjoint, very disruptive. But I will say this to the world, to the people who are non-believers, when they see that Christians cannot celebrate Easter together or Pascha together, this is a great indictment. It is such a criticism that I think it's very hard to come back with something like, oh, well, it's not that big a deal. Well, of course it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. And, okay, I'm going to make a joke. I'm sorry, but getting chocolate Easter bunnies on sale is not worth it, guys. Okay. All right. I shouldn't be flippant about something very serious, though. It is. There are a lot of mixed marriages, too, guys. Let's not forget that. Within my own household, my sister's married to a Roman Catholic, and my daughter is married to a Roman Catholic. And this year in particular, it's just almost outrageous, okay? Because pretty much we just started Lent, like 1 or 2 weeks when they had their Easter. You can't go through 2 crucifixions and 2 resurrections. It's almost an abomination. And that's why we should try to take it seriously. But I don't honestly know what the answer is. I really don't know what the answer is. I wish I did, but I think it would be, I cannot imagine Bartholomew. I know he and Francis are buddies, but I've met Bartholomew, by the way. He's a smart man. He is not going to jeopardize Orthodox unity over this issue. I cannot imagine that happening, but I can see maybe dialogue starting. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it. Let's find ways to, begin to address this again. So,
but there are basically 2 issues. I mean, it's the issue of the calendar within the Orthodox Church.
There's 2 issues.
The Gregorian and the Julian, and then the issue with the calendar with Catholics.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So we should actually start with our own garden.
We should start with our own. Absolutely. I agree with you, Claudia. Well, obviously Orthodox unity matters much more than Orthodox unity with the other Christian churches. Yeah, that's first and foremost. Yeah.
May I ask you just one more?
Mm-hmm. And by the way, guys, I know it's after 9 now, so if you start clicking off, I will not be insulted. But I know that, people are exhausted, and if you want to hang around and ask a question, that's fine too. But Claudia's going to ask a question too right now. So
I noticed on Sunday of Orthodoxy, there is this pan-Orthodox Vespers.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about it? Under which jurisdiction is this organized?
The Pan-Orthodox Vespers. Good to see you. Thank you. Okay. So Pan-Orthodox Vespers is usually agreed upon by the various hierarchs of the area. The idea is that Sunday of Orthodoxy is when all the Orthodox churches are supposed to worship together. They are supposed to come together to assert the truth of Orthodoxy that was asserted in 843 when the second phase of the iconoclastic controversy was finally settled and icons were restored and the truth of the faith was shared, and the idea that this is a time when all Orthodox can stand together. So in various studies, and in fact at the Ecumenical Patriarchate, he will often in the past he has called together Orthodox hierarchs from across all the different patriarchates, and doesn't usually happen that you get a whole bunch of them, but in the past on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, I remember seeing photos of something like 20 different Orthodox jurisdictions sending representatives or patriarchs or metropolitans, etc., to be present. So this is something that is promoted across the different nations. Now, at times, it's supposed to be something organized by the hierarchs of that city, and a lot depends on how they get along with each other.
Who is the
Yeah,
hierarch?
exactly. So I can't really give you the details about that because I'm not privy to who's in charge, et cetera. But the idea is really that they're all supposed to be talking to each other and all show up. Okay. So
Thank you.
yeah. Other questions or comments, guys? Otherwise, all right. Okay. Yeah, Connor, go ahead.
Sorry, can I ask a question unrelated to the church politics we're talking about? More about the Trinity.
Sure. Yes.
So St. Gregory Palamas makes the argument that the filioque clause logically entails that the Holy Spirit would be created. And I was wondering, is that because like the cause that's proper to the Son is the cause of creation? Or is he arguing that like I don't know, I guess I'm struggling with how he gets to the conclusion that filioque therefore created Holy Spirit. Like I get his line of thinking, but it's a little confusing to me. Um
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm actually not familiar with that particular argument by Palamas. So I would have to be supposing. I would love to read it if you know where
yeah, sure, I'll put the link in chat.
Yeah, okay. And what I could probably do is I'd like to read what he has to say. I mean, I've definitely studied the filioque and et cetera, but what I could do is if you put in in the chat your email too, I could respond to you by email,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me do that.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I see. Let's see. How do I save that? Let me see. Okay. Oh, it's from the apodictic treatises on the procession of the Holy Spirit. Is there, I have to get that book, I guess, huh? Is that?
Yeah, let me see. Maybe there's a PDF. I think all his works are online, maybe.
Mhm.
Let me see. Uh, uh,
Um,
oh, you know what? I think the company that made that book were the first people to translate it to English. So,
yeah.
do you, I
I,
mean,
I,
so, sorry.
I have the, his, treatises on the, on the Holy Hesitates, but not on the procession of the Holy Spirit. Well, if you could do a summary or maybe, I don't know, maybe photocopy a page and scan it or something, I would read it or.
Yeah, um, let me try and I'll try and find the PDF. Um, so I'm sure there is one. Do you know how to read Greek?
Well,
It's all right.
I mean, theological Greek and especially Byzantine Greek is a little bit different, So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it really depends. Uh, so, because, Palamas is, Byzantine, late Byzantine Greek. So
Yeah.
a little bit different. Yeah.
Let me see.
If you could summarize here, I see your email here. Connor.
Here, maybe, let me try and find the, I'm sorry to hold you, by the way. If you need to go, I'm sorry. If,
That's all right. I'm sure everybody, anyone else who needs to go, please go. But, and thank you for joining us. But, yeah, let's see here. Well, you know what, Connor, let me give you my email and,
thank you.
let's see here. Message, okay. I do think that, okay, so he believes, you're making the argument that he says that, filioque would entail, the Holy Spirit being created and not being, of the, same substance as of not being divine. And logically speaking, just in terms, I think it doesn't even have to hinge on the Son being the agent of creation, although that's probably operating in there. But the reality is that since from the time of the Cappadocians, the Eastern Church understands the Father is the source of the deity of the Son and the Spirit, right? So, if that source, if that deity is mediated by the Son is the person who, as you point out, is understood as the one who mediates creation, who, through the will of the Father, exercises this will by bringing creation into existence. So maybe he's understanding that the Spirit is not receiving the source of divinity from the Father, and therefore is not, he cannot possibly be divine. And what he receives from the Son has already, in some sense, cannot be sourced from the Father, because that would, come directly from the Father. But I'd love to hear his argument. I really just don't know. But I think you're probably on track with it. I usually would hear from the Byzantines that the idea that if the Father is the source of the divinity for the Spirit, what on earth would you expect the Son to be adding? What could he possibly be offering that doesn't come perfectly already from the Father? And to have that as a necessary agent, it confuses the personhood of Father with the Son.
Yeah.
Essentially destroying the person of the Father, destroying Trinity within the persons of the Trinity. I mean, lots and lots and lots of different.
Yeah, I just found this little, he says, again, by saying that the Son is also an origin of the divine spirit, the Latin-minded have been plainly shown to place the divine spirit in the same rank as creatures. So I think you're spot on. I remember him saying the stuff you're saying. So
Yeah. I think that's probably what's happening here.
well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure. Well, good luck to you, Connor. I give you a lot of credit for thinking so carefully about all of this stuff. So,
Thank you.
all right, guys, have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Take care and God bless.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
good night. Thank you.
You see some claps.
I'm sorry.
You got claps.
I forgot to do the prayer, but oh wow, people just think I'm terrible. What can I say? Let's see, how do I get out of this one? Let's see. I just get, you know what it is, I get caught up in doing something and I get focused on one thing and I fully intended to begin with a prayer and I just totally did not. I was more interested in getting all of the links connected,
Yeah,
So,
technology.
yeah, unfortunately.
I can send you some historical details on the Romanian church
okay.
if you want.
Absolutely. My email, you need it?
Yeah.
It's Helen, Helen. And then my zip code, which is 60076.